He adopted the puppy everyone was afraid of, growling, scarred, and left alone in a dark shelter cage. Everyone warned him to stay away, but something in those terrified eyes made him take a chance. That night, when a stranger broke into his home demanding the dog back, he realized this wasn't just any rescue. It was a target. As fear turns to suspicion, strange noises in the woods, missing reports, and whispered threats start closing in. The man thought he was saving a dog, but now the dog might be the only thing keeping him alive. Each bark, each scar, hides a secret someone is willing to kill for. Who trained this animal to fear a whistle? Why do dangerous men want him silenced? And when the truth finally comes out, will the man still believe he saved the dog? Or that the dog was sent to save him? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The morning had dawned gray and heavy, matching Harlan Keats's mood as he pulled his weathered pickup truck into the county animal shelter's gravel parking lot. The air felt thick with approaching rain, and dark clouds loomed overhead like unwelcome memories. He hadn't planned on doing anything today, except fixing the shelter's broken fence, a simple job that would keep his hands busy and his mind quiet. Clutching his worn leather toolbox, Harlan made his way through the shelter's front door. The familiar sense of cleaning supplies and animal life mingled in the air. Dogs barked in a scattered chorus from the kennels beyond the reception area, their voices echoing off cinder block walls. "Mr. Keats!" Sarah, the young receptionist, brightened at his arrival. "Thanks for coming out to look at that fence. It's been causing us headaches all week." Harlan nodded, offering a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No trouble. Just point me where you need me." But before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted from the back room. Two shelter workers hurried past, speaking in urgent whispers. Their concerned glances drew Harlan's attention to a separate holding area, somewhat removed from the main kennel space. "Everything all right?" he asked, though part of him wished he hadn't. Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Oh, it's that new arrival. Been here 3 days and nobody can get near him. We're running out of options." Something in her tone made Harlan pause. Setting down his toolbox, he followed her gaze toward the isolated section. "Mind if I take a look?" "I wouldn't," Sarah warned, but Harlan was already moving, drawn by an instinct he couldn't explain. The holding area was dimmer than the main shelter, and most of the crates were empty, except for one. In the corner, partially hidden in shadow, stood a large metal crate. Low growls emanated from within, carrying notes of both threat and fear. Harlan approached slowly, his boots scuffing softly against the concrete floor. As he drew closer, he could make out the form of a brindle-coated dog pressed against the back of the crate. Scars crisscrossed its muzzle and flanks, telling stories of past violence. One ear was torn, and one eye seemed slightly clouded, but there was an intelligence in that gaze that caught Harlan's attention. "Careful," one of the shelter workers called out. "He's not safe. We've tried everything, but he's too aggressive. Probably going to have to make a hard decision soon." The dog's growls intensified, but Harlan noticed something else beneath the threatening display. A slight tremor in the animal's frame, a tension that spoke more of terror than aggression. He recognized it because he'd seen it in his own reflection more times than he cared to count since May's death. Harlan crouched down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The dog's eyes tracked him, wary but alert. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse but gentle. "Rough time of it, haven't you?" The growling quieted slightly, though the dog remained rigid with tension. "He's got a history," Sarah said from behind him, her voice heavy with implication. "Came in as a stray, but there are signs. Well, we think he might have been used in fighting." Harlan absorbed this information, studying the scars that marked the dog's body. Despite the evidence of cruelty, there was something in the animal's defiant stance that stirred something in Harlan's chest, something he thought had died along with May. Standing slowly, he turned to Sarah. "I'll take him." The words surprised even him, but once spoken, they felt right. The shelter workers exchanged alarmed looks. "Mr. Keats," Sarah started, "I don't think that's a good idea. This dog needs professional rehabilitation, if it's even possible. He's dangerous." "He's scared," Harlan corrected quietly. "There's a difference." What followed was a flurry of concerned protests and warnings, along with a stack of liability forms that Harlan signed without hesitation. While the paperwork was being processed, he sat near the crate, speaking occasionally in low, measured tones to its occupant. "Needs a name," he mused aloud. The dog's dark coat reminded him of a bird's wings, and there was certainly something clever in those watchful eyes. "Rook," he decided. "What do you think about that?" The dog's ears twitched slightly, the first response that wasn't a growl. Getting Rook into Harlan's truck proved to be a careful operation. With patience and some creative maneuvering, they managed to transfer the dog from the crate to the passenger seat. Rook pressed himself against the door, as far from Harlan as possible, but at least the constant growling had subsided to occasional nervous rumbles. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the first drops of rain began to fall. Thunder rolled in the distance, and Harlan noticed Rook trembling, though the dog tried to hide it. The sight stirred something protective in him, something he thought he'd buried with his wife. "It's all right," he murmured, more to himself than to Rook. "We'll figure this out together." The rain intensified as they drove, drumming against the truck's roof in a steady rhythm. Through the windshield, the world appeared in shades of gray, but for the first time in 2 years, Harlan felt a spark of something that might have been hope. He glanced at his trembling passenger, taking in the scars and the fear and the fierce will to survive that radiated from the dog despite everything. 2 broken souls, brought together by chance or fate or whatever name you wanted to give it. Maybe they could help each other heal. Thunder crashed again, closer now, and Rook pressed himself further against the door. Without thinking, Harlan began to hum an old tune, one May used to sing during storms. The sound seemed to fill the truck's cab, competing with the rain and thunder, and after a while, he noticed Rook's trembling ease just slightly. The drive home stretched before them, full of uncertainty and challenge, but Harlan felt more sure of this decision than anything he'd done since losing May. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments of defiance, like adopting a dog everyone else had given up on. As they turned onto the rural road leading to Harlan's property, the rain began to ease, though the thunder continued to rumble in the distance. Rook remained tense but vigilant, his good eye taking in every detail of their journey. 2 outcasts, brought together by circumstance, heading toward whatever future awaited them. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle by the time Harlan pulled up to his farmhouse. Getting Rook inside proved to be another careful dance of patience and persistence. The dog refused to budge from the truck at first, but after 20 minutes of gentle coaxing, he finally crept out and followed Harlan at a safe distance. Inside, Harlan watched as Rook investigated the house with methodical precision, nose working overtime, body tense and ready to flee. The dog kept to the walls, mapping escape routes, checking windows and doors. It was the behavior of something that had learned the hard way to always have an exit strategy. "Kitchen's through there," Harlan said softly, pointing. "I'll get you some water." As he filled a bowl, he noticed Rook watching him from the doorway, muscles coiled tight. When Harlan set the water down and stepped back, the dog waited a full minute before darting forward for a few quick laps, then retreating to his observation post. The evening passed in this careful dance of boundaries and trust. Harlan heated up some leftover stew for himself and put out a bowl of kibble the shelter had sent home with them. Rook wouldn't eat while being watched, so Harlan pretended to focus on his own meal while keeping the dog in his peripheral vision. When bedtime came, Harlan laid out an old blanket in the corner of the living room. "It's yours if you want it," he told Rook, who had claimed a spot behind the armchair as his territory. "No pressure." Sleep came fitfully that night. Every time Harlan dozed off, some small sound would jerk him awake. Rook pacing the hallway, investigating creaks and shadows, still mapping his new environment. Around 2 a.m, the rain picked up again, drumming against the roof with renewed intensity. The crash of breaking glass jolted Harlan fully awake. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening. For a moment there was only the sound of rain. Then, footsteps. Heavy boots on broken glass. Someone was in his house. Harlan reached for the pry bar he kept beside his bed, a habit from his days doing demolition work that he'd never broken. As he crept toward his bedroom door, he heard Rook's growl, different from anything he'd heard at the shelter. This wasn't fear. This was warning. A man's voice cut through the darkness. "There you are, you worthless mutt! Get back on the truck where you belong." Harlan's blood ran cold. This wasn't a random break-in. They'd come for Rook. He moved down the hallway, keeping close to the wall. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in the living room for a split second. A tall figure in a rain-slicked jacket, something glinting in his hand. And Rook, hackles raised, teeth bared, standing his ground between the intruder and the hallway where Harlan stood. "Come on, dog," the man growled. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harlan stepped into the doorway, pry bar raised. "Get out of my house." The intruder spun around, and in the dim light filtering through the windows, Harlan saw the flash of a box cutter in his hand. "This ain't your business, old man. The dog's got owners." "The shelter says different," Harlan replied, voice steady despite his racing heart. "Leave, now." Instead, the man lunged forward, box cutter slashing through the air. Rook exploded into motion, faster than Harlan would have believed possible. The dog's teeth snapped at the intruder's arm, but the box cutter found its mark, opening a shallow cut along Rook's shoulder. The dog's yelp of pain ignited something in Harlan. He swung the pry bar, catching the intruder in the ribs. The man stumbled backward, knocking over the coffee table. Rook, despite his wound, stayed between them, blood matting his brindle coat. The next few moments were chaos. The intruder slashed wildly with the box cutter, keeping both Harlan and Rook at bay while backing toward the broken window. Harlan advanced steadily, pry bar at the ready, while Rook circled, looking for an opening. Lightning flashed again, and in that instant, the intruder turned and dove through the broken window. Harlan rushed forward in time to see him stumbling through the rain toward a waiting pickup truck. The vehicle's engine roared to life, tires spinning in the mud as it accelerated away into the darkness. For several long moments, Harlan stood at the window, rain spattering his face, listening to the truck's engine fade into the distance. When he finally turned around, his living room looked like a war zone. The coffee table was overturned, books and magazines scattered across the floor. Blood, both Rook's and possibly the intruder's, stained the carpet. Rook stood in the center of it all, sides heaving, blood trickling from the cut on his shoulder. But his eyes were fixed on Harlan, and for the first time, there was something other than fear in them. "Let me look at that cut," Harlan said softly, setting down the pry bar. To his surprise, Rook didn't back away when he approached. The dog stood still, trembling slightly, as Harlan examined the wound. It was long but shallow. It would heal, but it needed cleaning. They spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, Harlan carefully cleaning and bandaging Rook's shoulder while rain continued to pour outside. Neither of them slept. Every now and then, Rook would growl at a sound from outside, but he stayed close to Harlan, as if they'd formed some unspoken alliance in the heat of battle. Morning brought watery sunlight and the sound of tires on gravel. Harlan, who had been boarding up the broken window, saw the sheriff's department vehicle pull up. Deputy Nash Bricker stepped out, taking his time approaching the house, eyes scanning the scene with practiced indifference. "Heard there was some trouble last night," Bricker said by way of greeting. His gaze fell on Rook, who had positioned himself slightly behind Harlan, hackles raised. "Break in," Harlan replied. "Man with a box cutter, came for the dog." Bricker pulled out a notepad, but his posture suggested he was just going through the motions. "That the shelter dog? Heard you took him yesterday." "That's right. And now someone breaks in, specifically wanting this dog?" Bricker's tone was skeptical. "Sounds like maybe you got yourself involved in something best left alone, Keats." "Someone broke into my home," Harlan said firmly. "Attacked me and my dog with a weapon." Bricker jotted something down, though Harlan doubted it was anything substantial. "Probably just some crank. Maybe heard about the dog at the shelter, thought they'd try their luck." He closed his notebook. "My advice? Take the dog back. Not worth the trouble." "No," Harlan said simply. The deputy's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your choice. But if anything else happens, don't say I didn't warn you." He turned to leave, then paused. "Sorry about your window." Harlan watched the deputy's vehicle disappear down the drive, aware that something larger was at play here. The attack hadn't been random, and Bricker's dismissal felt calculated rather than casual. Inside, Rook pressed against Harlan's leg, not seeking comfort, but offering solidarity. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The dog no one wanted had found his person, and Harlan had found something worth fighting for. The rumors spread through Millbrook like wildfire in the days following the break-in. Harlan first noticed it at Miller's Hardware when conversations hushed as he walked down the aisles. Old Jim Miller, who'd always been friendly, kept his distance behind the counter. It wasn't until he overheard two women talking in the parking lot that he understood why. "That's him," one whispered, not quite quietly enough. "The one with the attack dog that bit the Thompson boy." Harlan stopped in his tracks. No such thing had happened. Rook hadn't left his property since coming home from the shelter. But the damage was already done. Later that afternoon, his phone rang. It was Martha Whitaker, who'd scheduled him to repair her porch railings. "I'm sorry, Harlan," she said, her voice strained with false politeness. "We've decided to go with another handyman. I just don't feel comfortable with that dangerous dog around my grandchildren." "Mrs. Whitaker," Harlan tried to explain, "those rumors aren't true. Rook hasn't—" The line went dead. Standing in his kitchen, Harlan felt the familiar weight of isolation settling back around him. It had been this way after May died, the way people avoided his grief like it was contagious. Now they were avoiding him for a different reason, but the loneliness felt the same. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Through the window, he saw Coralie Finch standing on his porch, holding what looked like a first aid kit. He'd seen her around town, knew she was training to be an EMT while caring for her sick mother next door, but they'd never spoken much. "Hi," she said when he opened the door. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes were direct and kind. "I heard about what happened the other night. Thought you might need some proper medical supplies for your dog." Harlan hesitated. Rook was in the living room, and after the break-in, he wasn't sure how the dog would react to visitors. "It's okay," Coralie added, seeming to read his concern. "I've got some experience with scared animals. May I come in?" After a moment's consideration, Harlan nodded and stepped aside. Rook appeared in the doorway to the living room, ears forward, watching intently but not aggressive. "Hey there, beautiful," Coralie said softly, not moving toward the dog. She set her kit down slowly and sat on the floor, making herself smaller. "That's quite a battle scar you've got." To Harlan's surprise, Rook's tail gave a slight wag. He moved closer, nose working as he investigated the newcomer. "He likes you," Harlan said, amazed. "He hasn't taken to anyone else." "Animals know when someone means well," Coralie replied, still not reaching for the dog. She let Rook approach at his own pace. "I heard what people are saying in town about him biting that Thompson kid, but I know that's not true. I was on duty at the clinic yesterday when Billy Thompson came in. He fell off his skateboard. Not a dog bite in sight." Relief flooded through Harlan. "Try telling that to everyone else." "People get scared of what they don't understand," Coralie said. By now, Rook had moved close enough to sniff her hand. "May I check his wound?" Harlan nodded, and Coralie slowly reached for her kit. As she opened it, a high-pitched squeak came from one of the hinges. The change in Rook was instant. He backed away, trembling, teeth bared. "Whoa," Coralie said, freezing in place. "That's interesting." "What is?" "That reaction to the sound. It's specific. Watch." She moved the kit again, producing the same squeak. Again, Rook reacted with fear and aggression. "That's not normal fear response. That's learned behavior." Harlan frowned. "What do you mean?" "In my EMT training, we studied trauma response. This looks like conditioning. Someone used specific triggers to provoke certain behaviors." She carefully opened the kit the rest of the way, avoiding the squeaky hinge. "Let me clean that wound, and we can talk more about it." It took time, but with Coralie's patient approach and Harlan's reassuring presence, they managed to properly clean and dress Rook's injury. As they worked, Coralie explained more about behavioral conditioning and how it was sometimes used in illegal dogfighting rings. "The squeaky sound might have been a signal," she said, applying the last piece of tape to the bandage. "A trigger to make him aggressive on command." The idea made Harlan sick to his stomach. Who would do that to an animal? Later, after Coralie left, Harlan went to his tool shed to get supplies for boarding up the broken window properly. As he opened the door, Rook following close behind, something strange happened. The dog caught a whiff of something on the shelf and went berserk, lunging, snarling, trying to both attack and retreat at the same time. Harlan backed them both out of the shed, heart pounding. Once in fresh air, Rook calmed down, but remained agitated. Harlan went back alone, examining the shelf carefully. There was a bottle of industrial solvent he'd used on a job last week. He'd noticed the sharp chemical smell before, but hadn't thought much of it. Now, remembering Coralie's words about triggers and conditioning, he wondered if this wasn't another piece of the puzzle. The high-pitched sound, the chemical smell. What else had been used to turn this dog into a weapon? Back in the house, Harlan watched Rook settle onto his bed in the corner. The same dog who'd shown such gentleness with Coralie, now peacefully chewing a rope toy. Nothing about his behavior seemed natural or innate. Someone had done this to him, had deliberately broken something inside him. The phone rang again. Another canceled job. Harlan let it go to voicemail. He'd survived loss before. He could survive being an outcast again. Besides, he wasn't completely alone anymore. He had Rook, who trusted him despite all his fears. And now he had Coralie, who saw through the rumors to the truth. What bothered him most wasn't the lost work or the whispers. It was the growing certainty that whoever had broken into his house that night wasn't going to simply give up. They wanted Rook back for a reason, And those triggers, the sound, the smell, were pieces of a larger, darker picture. Rook lifted his head from his toy, meeting Harlan's eyes with that steady gaze that seemed to hold so much understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Sometimes, Harlan realized, the family you need finds you when you least expect it, even if that family consists of a broken man and a wounded dog that nobody else wanted. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Harlan's backyard as he worked patiently with Rook. Over the past few days, they'd developed a quiet routine. Harlan would sit on the back steps, speaking in low, gentle tones, while Rook gradually ventured closer, learning to trust. "That's it, boy," Harlan murmured, holding out a piece of dried chicken. "Nice and easy." Rook's approach was cautious but steady. His scarred muzzle twitched as he sniffed the air, one ear, the torn one, cocked forward. Where once he would have snatched the food and retreated, now he took it carefully from Harlan's palm, staying close enough for a gentle pat. "Good boy," Harlan said softly. The transformation in Rook was subtle, but significant. The dog still startled at sudden movements and remained wary of strangers, but his eyes held less fear when meeting Harlan's gaze. They were working on sit. Rook already understood the command, but sometimes tensed up as if expecting punishment, when a sharp whistle cut through the morning air. It came from the direction of Miller's auto yard, about half a mile down the road. The change in Rook was immediate and disturbing. His whole body went rigid, muscles trembling beneath his brindle coat. A low growl rumbled in his chest, but it wasn't aggressive. It was fearful, almost plaintive. He backed away from Harlan, tail tucked, looking for somewhere to hide. Hey, it's okay," Harlan said, keeping his voice steady despite the concern tightening his chest. He'd seen Rook scared before, but this was different. This wasn't just fear, it was recognition. It took nearly an hour to calm Rook down. Even then, the dog remained on edge, jumping at every sound. Harlan couldn't shake the feeling that the whistle hadn't just frightened Rook, it had triggered something, some buried memory. Later that afternoon, Coralie's pickup truck rumbled into his driveway. She'd been checking in regularly since helping with Rook's wound, and Harlan had come to appreciate her straightforward manner and genuine concern. "Thought you might want to know what I found out?" she said without preamble, leaning against her truck. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her green eyes were troubled. "I had to drop off some paperwork at Sturbridge Veterinary Clinic this morning, part of my EMT certification. While I was there, I overheard something weird." Harlan's gut tightened. "What kind of weird?" "Dr. Sturbridge was in his office with someone. Door was open a crack. I heard him laughing about losing track of the brindle. Said something about how these things happen in the business." Coralie crossed her arms. "The way he said it, Harlan, it wasn't like a vet talking about a lost patient. It was dismissive, cold. Did you hear anything else?" "Yeah, the other person mentioned something about getting the merchandise back before the next event. Then they noticed me in the hallway and shut up pretty quick." She pushed off from the truck, stepping closer. "Harlan, you know what people say about Sturbridge's rescue operation, right?" He shook his head. Being a widower and somewhat of a loner, town gossip rarely reached him. "Well, officially, he runs this fancy rescue program, takes in strays, rehabilitates them, finds them homes. But there's always been whispers. Dogs that disappear, paperwork that doesn't add up." She glanced toward the house, where Rook was visible through the window. "And now this business with Rook." "The attack," Harlan said slowly. "The man who broke in, he wanted Rook back on the truck." "Exactly. And this morning I saw a truck behind Sturbridge's clinic, one of those enclosed animal transport vehicles, but it didn't have any rescue logos or markings. Nothing official. Harlan thought about Rook's reaction to the whistle, the chemical smell in the shed, the scars that spoke of systematic abuse rather than random injuries. You think Sturbridge is running something illegal? I think, Coralie said carefully, that Rook might have escaped from something much worse than a failed adoption. Those behavior triggers we noticed? They're not random. Someone trained him, conditioned him, for something specific. She met Harlan's eyes. And I think that rescue paperwork you got from the shelter might not be worth the paper it's printed on. The implication settled heavily between them. If Sturbridge was involved in dogfighting, if Rook had somehow escaped that life, then the break-in wasn't just about retrieving a lost dog. It was about protecting a criminal enterprise. We need to be careful, Coralie said, her voice low. If I'm right about this, these aren't people who'll just give up. And they've got connections. Sturbridge is respected in this town. Who's going to believe he's running an illegal fighting ring? Inside the house, Rook had moved to the window, watching them intently. His one clouded eye caught the light, making it gleam like frosted glass. Despite everything he'd been through, there was still such intelligence in his gaze, such capacity for trust and loyalty. What do we do? Harlan asked, though he already knew he'd do whatever it took to protect Rook. For now, we document everything. Any strange incidents, any unusual reactions from Rook. We need proof before we can take this to anyone. Coralie's expression softened as she looked at the dog. And we keep working with him. Show him not everyone in this world wants to hurt him. Harlan nodded, grateful for her steady presence and clear thinking. The whole situation felt bigger than him now, more dangerous than he'd imagined when he'd first seen that snarling, scared dog in the shelter. But looking at Rook, remembering how far they'd come already, he knew he couldn't walk away. I should get back to my rounds, Coralie said, pulling out her keys. But I'll keep my eyes and ears open at the clinic. And Harlan? She paused, her expression serious. Be careful. If Sturbridge really is behind this, he's got a lot to lose. After she left, Harlan sat on the porch steps with Rook, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The dog pressed against his leg, a warm, solid presence that somehow made the weight of their situation feel more manageable. We'll figure this out, boy, he promised quietly, scratching behind Rook's torn ear. Whatever happened to you before, it's over now. I won't let them hurt you again. Rook looked up at him with those knowing eyes, and Harlan felt the truth of their connection. Sometimes the deepest bonds were forged in the darkest places. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Harlan's truck bounced down the rutted dirt road leading to Milt Roebuck's cabin. Coralie sat in the passenger seat, clutching a manila folder filled with their hastily gathered evidence, dates, times, and locations of suspicious activity around Sturbridge's clinic. You sure about this? Harlan asked, glancing at his companion. Milt's not exactly known for being welcoming to visitors. Coralie nodded firmly. He was a game warden for 30 years. If anyone knows how to gather proper evidence of illegal activities, it's him. Plus, he's got no love for Sturbridge. Apparently, they had some run-ins back when Milt was still on duty. The cabin appeared through the trees, a weathered structure that seemed to grow right out of the surrounding forest. Wind chimes made from old fishing lures tinkled on the porch, and a thin stream of smoke curled from the stone chimney. Before they could even step out of the truck, the screen door creaked open. Milt Roebuck emerged, his lean frame topped by a battered ranger's hat that looked as old as he was. Sharp blue eyes studied them from beneath the hat's brim. Heard you coming half a mile back, he called out, not moving from his position on the porch. That truck of yours needs new shocks, Keats. Harlan climbed out, helping Coralie with the folder. Morning, Milt. Sorry to drop by unannounced, but we need your help. Always do when folks come out this far. Milt's gaze settled on Coralie. Miss Finch, heard you're working on getting your EMT certification. Yes, sir. Coralie straightened, clearly surprised he knew who she was. Still keep my ear to the ground, Milt explained, finally gesturing them inside. Habit from the old days. Come on in then, coffee's hot. The cabin's interior was sparse but organized, with maps covering one wall and various pieces of surveillance equipment neatly arranged on shelves. Milt poured 3 mugs of coffee and settled into a worn armchair, waiting. Coralie spread out their documentation on the coffee table, photos of unmarked trucks, notes about timing patterns, even a rough sketch of the remote barn they'd spotted during their initial surveillance. We think Dr. Sturbridge is running a dog-fighting operation, Harlan said bluntly, and we need help proving it. Milt's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. That's a heavy accusation, especially against someone like Sturbridge. We know, Coralie jumped in, but we've seen things that don't add up. The dog Harlan adopted, Rook, he shows all the signs of being a fighting dog, and there's been suspicious activity around that old barn off County Road 12. The McLaren property, Milt nodded, been abandoned since old Tom passed. Good spot for something illegal. Isolated, multiple access roads. He picked up their notes, scanning them with practiced efficiency. You've been watching? As much as we can, Harlan confirmed. But we need better evidence. Photos, video, something concrete. Milt set down the papers and stood, walking to one of his shelves. He returned with several small devices. Trail cameras, latest models, motion-activated, infrared capability for night shots, better than those cheap hunting store versions. He demonstrated how to set them up, explaining the best angles and heights for maximum coverage. Remember, evidence is worthless if you can't prove when and where it was taken. These stamp everything with GPS coordinates and time codes. They spent the next hour planning camera positions around the barn, with Milt marking potential locations on their map. His expertise was evident in every suggestion, every precaution he advised. One more thing, Milt said, disappearing into a back room. He returned with a small package. Sound recorder, military grade, can pick up conversations from 100 feet away in the right conditions. Might come in handy. This is more than we hoped for, Coralie said gratefully. Milt's weathered face creased in a slight smile. Been waiting years to catch Sturbridge at something. Man slippery as an eel. Just be careful. He's got friends in high places. They left with the equipment and Milt's promise to help analyze any evidence they gathered. The old game warden's support gave their mission a new sense of legitimacy and purpose. Over the next week, they worked methodically. During the day, they maintained their normal routines, Harlan doing repair jobs, Coralie continuing her EMT training. But at night, they took turns watching the barn, documenting everything. The cameras proved their worth almost immediately. They captured images of trucks arriving late at night, muffled sounds of dogs, and figures moving equipment in and out. Most damning were the regular visits from vehicles they recognized from town, including one that looked suspiciously like Deputy Bricker's personal truck. This is real, Coralie whispered one evening as they reviewed the footage. We're actually building a case. But their success was short-lived. The very next morning, Deputy Bricker's patrol car pulled up to Harlan's house. He wasn't alone. 2 animal control officers were with him. Mr. Keats, Bricker called out, his voice carrying false concern. We've received multiple complaints about your dog. Aggressive behavior, threatening children. Going to need to take him in. Harlan stood in his doorway, heart pounding. That's impossible. Rook hasn't left my property except for walks, and he's always leashed. Got signed statement saying otherwise. Bricker held up a folder. Standard procedure, Mr. Keats. Dog will be evaluated and returned if he passes assessment. "This is harassment," Coralie spoke up from behind Harlan. She'd arrived moments before Bricker, bringing coffee and updates about their surveillance. "You can't just take someone's dog without proper cause." "Ma'am, I suggest you stay out of official police business." Bricker's smirk barely concealed his satisfaction. "Mr. Keats, please step aside. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Inside, Rook growled low in his throat, sensing the tension. Harlan knew fighting would only make things worse. They'd take Rook anyway, and he'd likely face charges. "It's okay, boy," he said softly, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We'll fix this." The animal control officers moved in with their catch poles. Rook, to his credit, didn't fight. He'd learned trust in his time with Harlan. That trust now broke Harlan's heart as they led his dog away. "This is wrong," Coralie said fiercely as Bricker's car disappeared down the drive. "They're trying to silence us. They must know we're gathering evidence." Harlan stood motionless, staring after the vehicles. Everything in him screamed to chase them down, to fight back somehow, but that wouldn't help Rook. "We'll get him back," Coralie promised, laying a hand on his arm. Her touch anchored him, kept him from doing something rash. "We've got proof something's wrong here. We just need to move faster now." Harlan nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Legally or not," he said quietly, "I'm getting my dog back, whatever it takes." "We're getting him back," Coralie corrected him. "You're not in this alone." They spent the rest of the morning making calls, to lawyers, to the County Animal Welfare Board, to anyone who might help. But everywhere they turned, they hit walls. No one wanted to challenge Sturbridge's authority or question Deputy Bricker's actions. "They've got this town locked down tight," Coralie observed bitterly, as another call ended in polite dismissal. "But they made a mistake, taking Rook. Now we know for sure they're worried about what we might find." Harlan sat at his kitchen table, looking at Rook's empty bed in the corner. The house felt wrong without him. Too quiet, too empty. Like after May died, when silence became his only companion. "We're not giving up," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Rook didn't give up when they had him before. He fought his way out. Now it's our turn to fight for him." Coralie squeezed his shoulder, her presence a comfort in the face of this new challenge. They had evidence, they had allies, and most importantly, they had the truth on their side. Somehow that would have to be enough. Harlan couldn't sleep. The emptiness of his house echoed with Rook's absence, every corner holding memories of the dog who'd become so much more than just a pet. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, he gave up trying to rest and headed to his study, determined to find some legal way to fight back. The study was cluttered with years of paperwork, bills, receipts, and memories he hadn't been able to face since May died. Now, desperation drove him to dig through it all, searching for anything that might help. His hands trembled slightly as he opened filing cabinet drawers he hadn't touched in 2 years. The metallic scrape of the drawer felt loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Inside, folders were stacked neatly, May's organizational system still perfectly preserved. His throat tightened at the sight of her handwriting on the labels. House repairs, medical records, insurance. Then his fingers brushed against a manila envelope he didn't recognize, tucked behind the others. It was unmarked except for a date, 2 days before May's death. His heart began to pound as he pulled it out. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper, a carbon copy of a police report. The heading read, "Anonymous Tip," but it was filled out in May's precise handwriting. His hands shook as he read, "Suspicious activity at Old Millbrook Barn off Route 12. Multiple vehicles arriving late night, early morning. Dogs heard fighting. Believe illegal operation in progress. Plates recorded Missouri tag KRE 447. Harlan had to set the paper down. His vision blurred as memories crashed over him. May's unusual tension those last days, her distraction, the way she'd taken different routes to work. He'd assumed it was stress from her job at the veterinary clinic. "Oh, May," he whispered into the darkness. "What did you stumble onto?" The accident that killed her had never made sense. A hit and run on a clear day, no skid marks, no witnesses. The police investigation went nowhere. Deputy Bricker had handled it personally, expressing regret but finding no leads. Bricker, the same deputy who'd just taken Rook. Harlan's grief, carefully contained for 2 years, cracked open like ice in spring. The pain was fresh and raw, but now it carried something new. Rage. May hadn't just died. She'd been silenced. And the same people who'd hurt Rook, who'd tried to break that brave dog's spirit, were responsible. He spread the report out on his desk, forcing himself to read every word through the blur of tears. May had been thorough, noting times, descriptions, patterns of activity. She'd even sketched a rough map showing where vehicles parked and where she'd heard the fighting. The location she'd documented was less than 5 miles from where he and Coralie had been watching. The operation had moved, but not far. Same players, same cruel game. Dawn was breaking when Coralie found him still at his desk. She'd taken to checking on him early, bringing coffee and updates. One look at his face told her something had changed. "Harlan, what's wrong?" He wordlessly handed her the report. She read it quickly, her face growing pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "May knew. She tried to stop them. And they killed her for it." His voice was rough with emotion. "Made it look like an accident, just like they're trying to make Rook disappear now, legally, officially, with all the right paperwork." Coralie set the report down carefully. "This changes everything. We need to take this to someone outside the county. State police, maybe, or... No." Harlan stood up, something hard and determined settling in his chest. "They buried this once already. They've got connections, influence. We go official. They'll just close ranks again." "Then what do you want to do?" He looked at May's handwriting, at the careful notes she'd made trying to do the right thing. Then he thought of Rook, who'd fought his way free once already, only to be caught in the same net. "We're going to finish what May started," he said quietly. "But we're going to do it my way now. No more waiting, no more playing by their rules." Coralie studied him for a long moment. "You know this is dangerous. These people, they've already shown what they're willing to do." "I know." He met her gaze steadily. "That's why I won't ask you to help. You've done more than enough already." She shook her head firmly. "Don't even try that. May was my friend too, and Rook, well, he's family now, isn't he? We do this together." The sun was fully up now, painting the study in soft morning light. Harlan looked at the photos on his wall, him and May on their wedding day, at the lake, in their garden. Her smile so full of life and purpose. He'd spent 2 years drowning in grief, letting the world shrink around him until he was almost as caged as Rook had been. No more. "We'll need help," he said, already making plans. "Milt Roebuck might know people we can trust, and we need to move fast. There's no telling what they'll do to Rook once they have him." "I'll call Milt," Coralie said, "and I can get into the vet clinic's records, see if there's anything in May's old files that might help." Harlan nodded, carefully folding May's report and putting it in his pocket. The weight of it felt like a promise. For 2 years, he'd been a Foyt, ghost in his own life, hiding from his pain. Now he had purpose again, justice for May, freedom for Rook, and an end to the corruption that had taken both from him. May always said doing the right thing matters more than doing the safe thing, he said quietly. I forgot that for a while, Not anymore. Coralie squeezed his arm. We'll make it right, she promised. All of it. They spent the next hours planning, calling trusted contacts, gathering resources. But underneath all the practical preparations, Harlan felt something he hadn't experienced since May died. Hope. Not the gentle kind that comes with healing, but the fierce, burning hope of someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. His wife had died trying to expose this evil. His dog had suffered at their hands. Now it was his turn to stand up, to finish what May had started. And this time, he wouldn't let them silence the truth. The morning light grew stronger, chasing shadows from the corners of his study. Harlan looked at May's picture one last time, seeing now not just loss, but inspiration. She'd been braver than he knew. It was time to prove himself worthy of that courage. Harlan's kitchen became their war room. Papers and photos spread across the weathered oak table while Coralie organized their evidence into neat piles. Her EMT training showed in how she handled everything, methodical, precise, leaving nothing to chance. These truck photos from Milt's cameras are clear enough to read license plates, she said, sliding several images forward. And look at the timing, always between 1 and 3 in the morning, always on fight nights. Harlan studied the grainy nighttime shots. Can we trace the plates? Already did. She tapped a notepad filled with her neat handwriting. 3 of them belong to shell companies. The 4th is registered to someone who died 5 years ago. They're careful. Milt arrived just then, his old truck rattling up the gravel drive. He carried a heavy backpack that clinked as he set it down. Got something you need to see, he said grimly. Trail cameras caught more than just trucks last night. He pulled out his laptop, fingers clumsy on the keys as he brought up the footage. The screen showed a loading area behind an old barn. Men were moving cages, small, cramped things that barely gave the dogs inside room to turn around. Even in the infrared lighting, the animals' conditions were obvious. Scarred faces pressed against wire mesh. Some had fresh wounds. Just like Rook, Harlan whispered, his hands clenching. Worse, Milt said. Your boy got out before they could really work him over. These ones? He shook his head. Been watching that barn 3 nights now. They're moving operations, getting ready for something big. Coralie was already making copies of everything. We need to get this to someone who'll actually do something. The sheriff's office is useless. They're either involved or being paid to look away. Tried the sheriff this morning, Harlan said. Showed him everything we had. Know what he said? Looks like standard kennel operations to me. Nothing illegal about breeding dogs. Breeding? Milt spat. Those aren't breeding kennels. I've seen puppy mills. They're bad enough. But this? He gestured at the screen. This is organized crime. They worked through the afternoon, building their case. Coralie contacted former clients from the vet clinic where she'd worked, gathering statements about suspicious injuries, dogs that disappeared. Milt added reports from his game warden days, suspected fight locations, unexplained blood traces in abandoned buildings. We need someone outside the county system, Coralie said finally. Someone they can't touch. Milt nodded slowly. Got a friend in the state police, Terry Randall. Worked with him years back on a poaching case. He's straight as they come, and he's got the authority to bypass local jurisdiction. Can you trust him? Harlan asked. With my life, and I have, more than once. Coralie made the call. Her medical background gave her credibility as she explained the situation, the pattern of injuries, the suspicious deaths, the connection to May's accident. Trooper Randall listened, asked sharp questions, then told them to sit tight. He'd be there in 4 hours. While they waited, they prepared. Milt checked his old service weapon and showed them the best approaches to the barn on a topographical map. Coralie organized their evidence into clear, chronological order. Harlan paced, thinking of Rook in one of those tiny cages, wondering if he was even still alive. "We'll get him back," Coralie said softly, touching his arm. "May would be proud of you, you know, standing up like this." "Should have stood up sooner," he muttered. "Should have looked harder into her accident, asked more questions. You were grieving, but you're fighting now. That's what matters." Randall arrived as promised, a tall man with iron-gray hair and alert eyes that missed nothing. He reviewed their evidence carefully, asking detailed questions about sources and timestamps. When he finished, he sat back with a heavy sigh. "You've got enough here to justify a warrant," he said. "But if what you're saying about local law enforcement is true, we can't risk tipping them off. One phone call and that barn will be empty." "So what do we do?" Harlan asked. "We document everything, build an airtight case. Then we hit them hard and fast, with state resources they can't control." He looked at each of them in turn. "But I need you to understand, this is dangerous. People who run operations like this, they don't just walk away when they're caught. They fight back." "We understand," Coralie said firmly. "Good. Because once we start this, there's no backing out. We'll need statements from all of you. Documentation of every threat, every incident. And you'll need to be ready to testify." Milt nodded grimly. "Been ready for years. Just needed the right people to listen." They spent the next 2 hours going over their roles. Randall would coordinate with trusted state police units. Milt would monitor the barn, tracking movements and gathering more footage. Coralie would compile medical evidence from her contacts in local clinics. And Harlan would be their link to Rook, the living proof of what these people did to innocent animals. "One more thing," Randall said as he prepared to leave. "From now on, assume every phone is tapped, every email monitored. We communicate in person only, and watch your backs, all of you. People like this, they see the noose tightening, they get desperate." After he left, the three of them sat in Harlan's kitchen, the weight of what they'd started settling around them. Outside, a storm was building, thunder rolling in the distance. It reminded Harlan of the night he'd brought Rook home, another beginning in the rain. "You two should go," he said. "No sense in all of us being targets." "Not a chance," Coralie replied. "We're in this together." Milt just grunted his agreement, already checking his camera feeds. Harlan looked at them, the retired game warden who'd never stopped fighting, the young EMT with her fierce compassion, both risking everything to help him save one scarred dog and expose years of cruelty. He thought of May, of how she'd faced this evil alone. He wouldn't make that mistake. Together they watched the storm roll in, each lost in their own thoughts, but united in purpose. Tomorrow they would begin gathering more evidence, building their case piece by piece. But tonight they prepared for battle, knowing that somewhere out there, Rook and other innocent creatures waited for justice. The thunder grew closer, and rain began to fall. Harlan's hands gripped the steering wheel as he pulled into the county impound lot. His heart pounded, but his face remained calm. The forged transfer papers felt heavy in his jacket pocket. Coralie had spent hours getting them right, copying legitimate letterhead from her EMT training center. "Remember," she had said, "act like you belong there, like this is just routine paperwork." The afternoon sun beat down on the gravel lot as Harlan stepped out of his truck. A bored-looking clerk sat behind bulletproof glass, barely glancing up from her phone as he approached. "Need to process a transfer for one of the seized animals," Harlan said, sliding the papers through the slot. "For rehabilitation assessment." The clerk examined the documents with disinterest. "Which one?" "Brindle mix, brought in 3 days ago." She typed something into her computer, frowning slightly. "That one's marked for special handling." Harlan's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice steady. That's why we're moving him. Need to evaluate his behavior in a controlled setting. After what felt like hours, she shrugged and stamped the papers. Whatever. Sign here. Handlers around back. The kennel area reeked of bleach and fear. Rook's cage was at the far end, isolated from the other dogs. When he saw Harlan, his tail gave a single thump, but he stayed silent. Smart dog, knowing to keep quiet. The handler approached with a catch pole. This one's nasty. You sure you want him? That's what the paperwork says, Harlan replied evenly, though his fists clenched at seeing the cruel metal loop. They loaded Rook into the transport crate in Harlan's truck. The moment they cleared the gate, Harlan pulled over and opened the crate. Rook burst out, trembling but alive, pressing against Harlan's legs. It's okay, boy, Harlan murmured. We got you out. We got you. At Harlan's house, Coralie was waiting with medical supplies. Her face tightened when she saw Rook's condition. 3 days in the pound had left him thinner, with new stress marks around his eyes. Those bastards, she muttered, running gentle hands over him. Barely fed him, and look at these marks from the catch pole. She worked methodically, cleaning small wounds and checking his vital signs while Harlan held him steady. Rook endured it all stoically, only whining once when she found a particularly tender spot. He's dehydrated, but okay otherwise, she finally announced. Nothing some good food and rest won't fix. We can't keep him here, Harlan said. They'll come looking once they realize those papers were fake. Already handled. Milt's got a safe house ready, an old hunting cabin. Off the grid, hard to find unless you know where to look. While Rook wolfed down a bowl of food, they gathered supplies. Harlan packed dog food, water, and basic medical supplies. Coralie brought her EMT bag, just in case. They worked quickly, knowing time was short. Got something else, Coralie said, pulling out her phone. That charity auction Sturbridge is running this weekend? I volunteered as a medic. They're desperate for staff since their usual person called in sick. Harlan looked up sharply. That's too dangerous. It's our best chance to get inside. I'll have access to the whole facility, including the treatment areas. She met his concerned gaze. I can handle myself, Harlan, and we need eyes in there. Before he could argue further, Milt's truck rumbled up the drive. The old game warden stepped out, looking grimmer than usual. Got the cameras set up around the auction site, he reported. 3 main buildings, the show barn where they'll hold the auction, a storage shed, and what they're calling the quarantine facility. That's where they're keeping the fighters. He spread out several photos on Harlan's kitchen table. They showed vehicles coming and going at odd hours, men unloading crates under cover of darkness. They're bringing in dogs from all over, Milt continued, using legitimate rescue transports as cover. Smart setup. Makes it hard to track what's really moving through there. How many dogs are we talking about? Harlan asked. Based on the traffic? At least 20. Maybe more. All breeds known for fighting. They're calling it a specialty adoption event. Coralie's face hardened. More like a fighter's shopping spree. They spent the next hour planning. Coralie would work the auction as planned, documenting everything she could. Milt would monitor from his surveillance position in the woods, ready to call in backup if needed. Harlan would get Rook to safety, then return to help coordinate. One more thing, Milt said, pulling out a small package. Wireless earpieces, military surplus, completely secure. We'll be able to stay in contact throughout the operation. As they prepared to move out, Harlan knelt beside Rook, who watched him with knowing eyes. I've got to get you somewhere safe, boy. Then we're going to stop these people, for good this time. The drive to Milt's cabin took them deep into the back country, down logging roads and game trails until civilization seemed a distant memory. The cabin itself was little more than a shack, but it was solid and well hidden. Solar panels for power, Milt explained as they unloaded supplies. "Rainwater collection system. Could stay up here for weeks without leaving a trace." Harlan settled Rook inside, making sure he had food, water, and comfortable bedding. The dog seemed to understand the need for quiet, staying close but alert. "I'll be back," Harlan promised softly. "You stay safe." Back at his truck, Coralie was reviewing the auction details on her phone. "Registration starts at 9 o'clock Saturday morning. They're expecting over 100 qualified adopters." "Buyers, you mean?" Harlan growled. "Right. Each one pre-screened by Sturbridge himself. I'm supposed to arrive early to help set up the medical station." "Remember," Milt warned, "your job is to observe and document. No heroics. We need to build a case that will stick." Coralie nodded, but her eyes were steel. "I'll get what we need. Just be ready when the time comes." They spent the rest of the evening going over contingencies. Milt marked emergency exit routes on maps. Coralie memorized the layout she'd been sent. Harlan cleaned and checked their communication gear. As night fell, they gathered one last time in Milt's cabin. The gravity of what they were attempting hung heavy in the air. If they failed, it wouldn't just be Rook at risk. Dozens of dogs would disappear into the fighting circuit, and Sturbridge's operation would continue destroying lives. "Get some rest," Milt advised. "Tomorrow we start gathering intel. Saturday we end this." Harlan watched Coralie drive away, her taillights disappearing into the darkness. Rook pressed against his leg, offering silent support. Together they stood guard in the night, waiting for dawn and the chance to bring justice to those who had hurt them both. Inside the cabin, Milt's surveillance equipment hummed softly, monitoring the comings and goings at Sturbridge's compound. On his laptop, camera feeds showed more trucks arriving, more crates being unloaded. The auction was drawing near, and with it, their chance to expose the truth. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Harlan crouched behind stacked crates near the loading dock. The massive red barn loomed before him, its floodlights creating harsh shadows in the gathering dusk. A steady stream of expensive vehicles rolled up the gravel drive, sleek SUVs and lifted trucks that spoke of money and influence. Inside his jacket pocket, the small camera felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Everything hinged on getting clear footage of these transactions. He checked his earpiece for the third time, making sure the connection to Milt and Coralie remained solid. "Medical station's all set up." Coralie's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "You wouldn't believe who's here, Harlan. Judge Patterson just walked in, and I spotted 3 county commissioners." Harlan's jaw tightened. The corruption ran deeper than they'd imagined. "Roger that," Milt's gravelly voice responded from his hidden position in the tree line. "Keep your heads down. Storm's rolling in fast. Might work in our favor. Provide some cover." The first fat drops of rain began to fall as more vehicles arrived. Harlan recognized several of them: the mayor's black Cadillac, Police Chief Weber's personal truck. Each arrival felt like another betrayal of the community's trust. Through the loading dock's partially open door, Harlan could see rows of steel cages lining the barn's interior. The dogs inside were eerily quiet, trained through fear to make no sound. His heart ached thinking of Rook enduring such treatment. "They're starting," Coralie reported. "Sturbridge is giving some speech about responsible placement and specialized homes. Makes me sick." Harlan adjusted his position, finding a better angle to film through the gap. The rain was falling steadily now, drumming on the metal roof. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a longer roll of thunder. Inside, Dr. Sturbridge stood on a raised platform, his usual veterinary charm on full display. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this exclusive event. Each animal has been carefully evaluated and prepared for placement in the right situation." The meaning behind his words was clear to everyone present. These weren't pets being adopted. They were weapons being sold to the highest bidder. The first dog was brought out, a muscular pit bull with cropped ears and a network of scars across its chest. Harlan filmed as hands went up, bids were called, and money changed hands. No paperwork, no records, just cash and knowing looks. "Got 3 men by the north entrance I don't like," Milt warned. "Look like hired muscle. Keep your eyes open." Coralie moved between the gathered buyers, playing her role perfectly. Her EMT uniform and badge gave her the perfect cover to observe everything while pretending to check medical supplies. She carefully documented faces, conversations, and transactions with her phone's hidden camera. Another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, closer this time. The storm was almost directly overhead, its energy matching the tension in the air. Harlan shifted position again, trying to stay in the shadows while keeping his camera steady. Through his earpiece, he heard Coralie's sharp intake of breath. "Harlan, Nash Bricker just walked in, and he's not alone. There's a guy with him I've never seen before. Expensive suit, city type." "That's Morgan Blackwood," Milt's voice crackled. "Big player in underground fighting circuits up north. This is bigger than local corruption. They're running dogs across state lines." Harlan zoomed in on Bricker and his companion, making sure to get clear footage of their interaction with Sturbridge. Money changed hands. A lot of it. The sight made his blood boil, remembering how Bricker had taken Rook under false pretenses. The auction continued, each sale more disturbing than the last. Young dogs, old fighters, even puppies destined for training, all paraded before the crowd of respected community leaders who had gathered to buy them. Lightning cracked directly overhead, and the barn's lights flickered. In that moment of darkness, Harlan heard a sound that made his heart stop, a familiar whistle, high and sharp, followed by the chemical smell he'd discovered in his tool shed. Several dogs in their cages began to react, their conditioning taking over. The sound and smell were triggers, signals to fight. Among the chaos, Harlan recognized the pattern, the same methods used on Rook. "They're demonstrating the control system," Coralie whispered urgently, "showing buyers how to trigger the dogs. Harlan, this is everything we need. They're exposing their whole operation." But before Harlan could respond, a burst of lightning illuminated his position. Through the loading dock door, he locked eyes with Nash Bricker, whose face transformed from surprise to rage in an instant. "We've got company!" Harlan hissed into his earpiece, dropping behind the crates as footsteps approached. "Coralie, get out now!" "Negative," she responded firmly. "Almost got their whole client list. Just need—" Her transmission cut off as another thunderclap shook the barn. Harlan heard shouts and the sound of running feet. The rain was pouring now, turning the ground to mud as he pressed himself against the crates. "Stay put," Milt ordered. "State police are 10 minutes out, just need to hold position." But Harlan knew they didn't have 10 minutes. He could hear men spreading out, searching methodically. The chemical smell grew stronger, and he realized with horror that they were using it to flush out anyone who might be hiding. Through the gap in the door, he saw Coralie trying to maintain her cover, still moving among the buyers. But Sturbridge was watching her now, his eyes narrow with suspicion. The whole operation balanced on a knife's edge, with the storm raging overhead, and discovery just moments away. Lightning flashed again, and in its stark light, Harlan saw the truth of what they'd uncovered. Not just a dog-fighting ring, but a network of corruption that reached into every corner of their community. The evidence in his camera could bring it all down, if they could just hold out a little longer. Rain poured down his face as he crouched in the darkness, listening to approaching footsteps and waiting for the moment when everything would change. The thunder rolled on, nature's fury matching the tension of the moment as their carefully laid plans began to unravel in the stormy night. The rain hammered against the truck's windshield as Harlan pressed the accelerator, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Rook crouched low in the passenger seat, his scarred body tense and alert. Behind them, headlights cut through the darkness, growing larger in the rear-view mirror. "Hold on, boy," Harlan muttered, taking a sharp turn onto River Road. The old steel bridge lay ahead, their only escape route across the swollen creek. Lightning flashed, illuminating the churning water below, now a raging torrent from the storm. The truck's tires splashed through deepening puddles as they approached the bridge. Harlan's heart pounded against his ribs, knowing they were running out of options. The pursuing vehicles were getting closer, their engines roaring through the storm. The first section of steel grating rattled under their wheels as they started across the bridge. Through the rain-streaked glass, Harlan could barely make out the other side. The water below had risen almost to the bridge's support beams, carrying tree branches and debris in its current. Suddenly, bright lights flooded the cab from both directions. Deputy Nash Bricker's patrol car blocked the far end of the bridge, while another vehicle cut off their retreat. They were trapped. "Out of the truck, Keats!" Bricker's voice boomed through a loudspeaker, barely audible over the storm. "Last chance to do this the easy way." Harlan's mind raced. The evidence was safely uploaded to Coralie's cloud storage. They couldn't destroy that now. But he and Rook were cornered, with an angry river on both sides and corrupt law enforcement closing in. Through the side mirror, he saw movement. A massive pickup truck was accelerating toward them from behind, its chrome grille gleaming in the lightning. Harlan recognized the driver, one of Sturbridge's men from the auction. "Rook, brace yourself!" Harlan shouted. But it was too late. The impact was devastating. Metal screamed against metal as the larger truck slammed into their rear quarter panel. Harlan's pickup spun sideways, tires losing grip on the wet steel grating. The world tilted and twisted as they slid toward the bridge's guardrail. Time seemed to slow. Harlan saw each moment with crystal clarity. The rain drops frozen in the air, Rook's fur standing on end, the flash of lightning that illuminated the Shul, churning water below. Then reality crashed back at full speed as their truck hit the railing. The barrier gave way with a tortured shriek of failing metal. Harlan's stomach lurched as the front end of the truck tipped forward, suspended over the flood. He grabbed for Rook, but the dog was already scrambling toward the back of the cab. "No, stay back!" Harlan yelled, but another impact from behind sent them over the edge. The truck hung for a moment, balanced on the broken railing, then gravity took hold. They were falling. The river rushed up to meet them, black and angry in the storm. Harlan yanked at his seatbelt, but the locking mechanism had engaged during the impact. The webbing wouldn't budge. Water crashed over the hood as they hit the river nose first. The current grabbed the truck immediately, trying to pull it under. Cold water began seeping through the floorboards and door seals. "Rook, get out!" Harlan fought with the seatbelt, his fingers slipping on the wet release button. The water was rising fast inside the cab, already past his knees. But instead of trying to escape, Rook lunged forward. The dog's powerful jaws clamped onto the seatbelt webbing near Harlan's shoulder. Rook braced his paws against the seat and began to pull, growling with effort. The water reached their chests. Harlan could hear the synthetic fibers starting to tear as Rook worked at them frantically. The truck was almost completely submerged now, tilting with the current. Only a small pocket of air remained near the roof. With a final savage shake of his head, Rook severed the belt. Harlan immediately reached for the side window, but the electrical system was dead. The manual window crank had been torn off in the collision. Water touched the ceiling. Their last air pocket disappeared as the truck settled on the river bottom. In the darkness, Harlan felt Rook bumping against his arm, pushing him toward the rear window. Understanding flashed through his mind. The back glass was their only chance. Harlan grabbed the tire iron from under his seat, grateful he'd never cleaned out his tools. He pulled his legs under him, bracing against the seat as best he could in the swirling water. His lungs were burning. With all his remaining strength, he swung the tire iron at the rear window. The first hit produced a web of cracks. The second impact shattered the glass completely. The current rushed in, tumbling them like leaves in a whirlwind. Harlan felt Rook's fur brush past him as they were swept out of the truck. He kicked hard, not knowing which way was up in the turbulent water. His head broke the surface with a desperate gasp. The river was carrying him downstream at terrifying speed, past trees and submerged fence posts. Something solid struck his shoulder, spinning him around. "Rook!" he shouted between breaths, searching the churning water for any sign of the dog. Lightning flashed again, and he caught a glimpse of dark fur a few yards away. Rook was swimming, strongly, angling toward the bank. Harlan followed, fighting the current that wanted to drag him back to the center. His muscles screamed with exhaustion. Another lightning strike showed a fallen tree ahead, its branches reaching into the water. As they swept past, both man and dog grabbed at the tangle of limbs. Harlan's fingers found purchase on a thick branch, and he pulled himself toward the trunk. Rook paddled closer, allowing Harlan to grab his scruff and help him climb onto the relatively stable wood. They clung there in the rain, shivering and gasping, as emergency lights flashed on the bridge far upstream. Harlan hugged Rook close, feeling the dog's rapid heartbeat against his chest. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely. "Good boy, Rook." The dog pressed against him, offering warmth despite his own trembling. Together they waited in the storm, knowing they couldn't stay hidden forever, but grateful for each breath, each moment of life snatched from the flood's grasp. Above them, lightning continued to slash across the sky, illuminating the bridge where Deputy Bricker and his men searched in vain. The river had saved them, at least for now, carrying them beyond the reach of corruption and cruelty. But the night wasn't over, and they were far from safe. Dragging themselves from the flooded ravine, Harlan and Rook made their way through the darkness toward the auction barn. Their clothes were soaked, but determination drove them forward. Through the rain, they could see the floodlights casting harsh shadows across the muddy ground. "Coralie's in there somewhere," Harlan whispered to Rook, his voice tight with worry. He'd spotted her EMT jacket through a window, surrounded by Sturbridge's men. They crept around to the electrical panel on the barn's exterior. Harlan's hands, though cold and shaking, knew exactly what to do. Years of handyman work made the task simple, even in the dark. With a few quick movements, he cut the main power lines. The barn plunged into darkness. Shouts of confusion erupted inside, followed by the whir of emergency generators kicking in. Amber backup lights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the scene. At that exact moment, phones began ringing throughout the crowd. The live stream footage had reached the state troopers. Their evidence was out. Chaos erupted as buyers realized they'd been exposed. People rushed for the exits, abandoning their illegal purchases. Dogs barked in their cages as handlers tried to load them onto trucks. Through the pandemonium, Deputy Bricker spotted Harlan. With a roar of rage, he charged forward, but Rook was faster. The dog launched himself at the corrupt officer, driving him face first into the mud. Bricker struggled, but Rook held him down, growling low in his throat until the approaching sirens grew louder. Through the chaos, Dr. Sturbridge backed Coralie against the barn's wooden walls, a cattle prod crackling with blue electricity in his hands. His silver hair was disheveled, his usual polished appearance crumbling along with his facade. "You should have minded your own business," he snarled, jabbing the prod toward her. Harlan reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out his phone. He pressed play on the recording they'd discovered earlier, that distinct high-pitched whistle that had made Rook react so violently before. The sound cut through the barn's chaos like a knife. Every fighting dog's head snapped up, conditioning taking over. But this time, their trained aggression turned toward their tormentors. Sturbridge's eyes widened in horror as his own brutal training worked against him. The dogs lunged forward, driving him backward until he stumbled into an open feed chute. He fell hard, trapped by the very animals he'd trained to attack. His screams echoed through the barn as state trooper vehicles skidded to a halt outside, their red and blue lights painting the scene in alternating colors. Rook stood protectively over Harlan, blood matting his brindle fur, but his head held high. Officers swarmed the barn, snapping handcuffs on Sturbridge and his associates as they read them their rights. In the days following the raid, investigators swarmed through Sturbridge's properties like ants at a picnic. They uncovered a trail of evidence that led to an unexpected revelation. Among the documents was a crumpled repair bill for a truck, dated the same night May Keats died, registered to Sturbridge's nephew, Tyler. "We found paint transfers on an old vehicle in his garage," the lead investigator told Harlan. "They match the evidence from your wife's case." Harlan sat in the sheriff's office, his calloused hands clasped tightly. Rook lay at his feet, refusing to leave his side. The dog's presence gave him strength as he finally gave his statement about May's suspicious death. "She knew," Harlan said quietly. "May discovered what they were doing to those dogs. She tried to stop it." The truth spread through the county like wildfire. Deputy Nash Bricker and Dr. Sturbridge faced multiple indictments: conspiracy, animal cruelty, and now obstruction of justice in May's death. Their web of corruption unraveled thread by thread. Local news stations clamored for interviews about Rook's heroic actions during the raid. The story of a rescued fighting dog turning protector captured hearts across the state. But Harlan declined the attention, preferring to keep Rook away from the spotlight. "He's been through enough," Harlan told Coralie as they sat on his porch one evening. "We both have?" Rook dozed between them, finally at peace. The scars on his muzzle would always tell his story, but now they spoke of triumph rather than tragedy. May's memory could rest easy. Justice had come full circle. The autumn leaves painted the Missouri countryside in brilliant golds and reds as Harlan, Coralie, and Rook trained at Milt's property. Under the old game warden's watchful eye, Rook bounded through obstacle courses and tracked hidden scents with growing confidence. "He's got a natural talent for this," Milt observed, adjusting his weathered ranger's hat. "Never seen a dog pick up search patterns so quick." Harlan watched with pride as Rook located another training dummy in the tall grass. The dog's brindle coat gleamed in the sunlight, his once fearful demeanor replaced by purposeful determination. Those same scars that had once marked him as an outcast now testified to his resilience. Coralie stood beside Harlan, her shoulder brushing his. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining. The horrors they'd faced together had forged something precious between them, a love built on trust and shared courage. "He's come so far," Coralie said softly. "We all have." As dawn broke over the misty fields, painting the sky in gentle pinks and golds, Rook sat contentedly between them. His steady presence anchored them, a living reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal. The dog once feared by all had become their faithful guardian, his transformation mirroring their own journey from isolation to connection. Harlan squeezed Coralie's hand, feeling the rightness of this moment. Together they faced the rising sun, ready to begin anew. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.